My boss thought I'd go to prison for his scam. Instead, the FBI took him. I was staring at a low-resolution, watermarked stock photo of a smiling man in a yellow hard hat on my secondary monitor, the cold realization sinking into my bones that my company had just paid this absolute phantom $95,000. My fingers hovered over the mechanical keyboard, trembling slightly against the plastic keys, because the metadata attached to this ghost employee didn't just expose a massive corporate embezzlement ring operating right under our noses. It revealed something infinitely more sinister. The digital signature approving every single fraudulent wire transfer didn't belong to the thief. It belonged to me. To understand the sheer, unadulterated audacity of this betrayal, we have to go back exactly 6 months to the polished mahogany desk of my department manager, Gary. I was a junior payroll administrator, holding degrees in both accounting and forensic data analytics, yet I was barely scraping by on a salary that hadn't been adjusted for inflation since I was hired 3 years prior. I had walked into Gary's corner office with a meticulously researched portfolio, outlining my recent certifications, my flawless performance metrics, and a highly reasonable request for a basic cost of living adjustment. Gary was a man who looked like he had been manufactured in a corporate laboratory designed to produce middle management sociopaths. He wore perfectly tailored Italian suits, sported a perpetual, leathery golf tan that he maintained year-round, and constantly smelled of expensive Santal 33 cologne and stale espresso. The budget is absolutely bone-dry, Ruby, Gary sighed, rubbing his temples in a theatrical display of profound exhaustion, pushing my compensation portfolio back across the desk without even opening it. I'm barely making rent, Gary, I whispered, keeping my voice level despite the burning sensation rising in my throat. I took on the entire legacy database migration by myself. I am doing the work of 3 senior administrators. He leaned forward, steepling his perfectly manicured fingers, his eyes narrowing into cold, patronizing slits. We all have to make sacrifices in this economic climate, Ruby. I'm taking a pay cut myself just to keep the lights on around here, he hissed, the venom in his voice designed to make me feel small, greedy, and ungrateful. I felt the heat rising in my neck and my vision went blurry with rage. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip his heavy mahogany desk right into his lap. Instead, I forced a tight, humiliating nod, stood up, and walked out of his office. 10 minutes later, I watched from the break room window as the man who claimed to be taking a pay cut to keep the lights on strutted out to the executive parking lot, unlocked his brand new, charcoal gray Porsche 911 Turbo, and roared out of the complex. The rage didn't dissipate. It crystallized. It became the fuel that powered me through the grueling, mind-numbing task he had dumped entirely on my shoulders, migrating our rotting, 10-year-old legacy Oracle payroll database into a sleek, encrypted cloud infrastructure. It was a tedious, monumental undertaking that required combing through thousands of rows of employee data, verifying tax identifiers, and ensuring the routing protocols didn't shatter during the transition. It was 11:45 p.m. on a rainy Thursday. The fluorescent lights of the deserted accounting department hummed above me, casting a sickly yellow glow over my cubicle. I was cross-referencing a batch of remote consultant profiles when my eyes locked onto row 4892. The name was John Smith. The title was External Logistics Consultant. The annual salary was $95,000. My forensic training, honed over years of analyzing data anomalies, immediately triggered an internal alarm. The profile was entirely too sterile. I opened the internal Slack directory. John Smith didn't have an account. I checked the global Outlook exchange. John Smith had never sent or received a single internal email. I pulled his direct deposit routing information. The funds weren't going to a standard Bank of America or Chase account. They were being funneled through an obscure payment gateway known for international wire obfuscation, ultimately landing in an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, cold sweat prickling at my hairline. I clicked into the HR portal to view his mandatory identification documents. That was when I found the photo. It wasn't a scan of a driver's license or a passport. It was a generic, low-resolution JPEG of a construction worker. When I ran a reverse image search, it instantly popped up on Getty Images, smiling man in hard hat pointing at blueprint. Gary was paying a JPEG $95,000 a year. I didn't stop there. The adrenaline pushed the exhaustion completely out of my system. I ran a targeted SQL query, filtering the entire database for any active employee profiles lacking an internal company email address and routing to non-domestic banking institutions. 3 more names populated on my screen. Sam Spade, Philip Marlowe, Dick Steele, My stomach dropped to the floor. Gary was an insufferable 1940s noir film buff. He kept a vintage, framed poster of the Maltese Falcon right behind his desk. He hadn't just created one ghost employee, he had fabricated an entire, shadow team, of consultants, naming them after famous fictional detectives. He was so incredibly arrogant, so entirely convinced of his own untouchable intellect, that he essentially signed his own crime with a cinematic inside joke. I quickly ran the aggregate totals. The 4 ghosts combined were draining over $400,000 a year from the company payroll. That's when the real bombshell dropped. I pulled up the raw server logs to document the fraudulent entries. I needed to see the exact timestamp of when Gary had instantiated these profiles. I scrolled over to the approving_manager_ID column, fully expecting to see Gary's executive credentials stamped across the digital ledger. The column didn't display Gary's ID. It displayed EMP 8993. I stared at the alphanumeric string, the air completely leaving my lungs. The sterile hum of the server room suddenly felt deafening. EMP 8993 was my employee ID. Gary hadn't just set up a massive embezzlement ring. He had meticulously weaponized the legacy system's vulnerability to rewrite the metadata. Every single time a $95,000 wire transfer was initiated to one of his noir ghosts, the system registered that I had personally audited and approved the transaction. He was building a watertight, heavily documented coffin just for me. If the quarterly auditors ever flagged the anomalies, Gary would simply play the shocked, betrayed manager. He would point the finger squarely at the underpaid junior administrator with a background in forensic data who clearly used her technical skills to rob the company blind. I would go to federal prison, and he would drive away in his Porsche. I didn't panic. Panic is a luxury for people who have a safety net. I had an empty bank account and a sociopath trying to destroy my life. The fear instantly burned away, replaced by a cold, calculating, and absolute need for absolute annihilation. My first instinct was to lock Gary out of the system and instantly delete the ghost profiles. But as I analyzed the back-end code, I realized how deeply he had embedded his claws into the architecture. Gary had paid a private developer to install a dead man's switch hidden deep within the payroll software's execution scripts. It was a brilliant, paranoid piece of code. If anyone attempted to alter the routing numbers, suspend the accounts, or delete the profiles of the shadow team, a hidden API would instantly trigger, sending an encrypted SMS notification directly to Gary's personal iPhone. He would know I was onto him before the server even finished processing the command. He would wipe the offshore accounts, destroy his hard drive, and finalize the frame-up. I couldn't touch the real database, so I built a fake one. Over the next 48 hours, fueled by nothing but black coffee and pure spite, I utilized every ounce of my coding expertise to construct what I called the mirror ledger. I created a phantom database running perfectly parallel to the main server. I intercepted the API calls originating from the payroll dashboard. When Gary logged into his executive suite to check the status of his fraudulent transfers, my code intercepted his request and fed him a spoofed JSON payload. His screen would show beautiful, green check marks, confirming the money had safely hit his offshore shell company. But in reality, I had rewritten the core routing logic for the entire next payment cycle. I didn't cancel the upcoming $33,000 monthly ghost transfer. I let it execute. But the moment the funds left the company's master account, my mirror ledger snatched the digital wire mid-flight and forcefully redirected every single cent into a highly secure, company-controlled internal escrow account that only the chief financial officer and I had the cryptographic keys to access. Gary's dashboard told him he was rich. The reality was that his money was sitting in a digital vault he didn't even know existed. But trapping the funds wasn't enough. I needed him completely, permanently ruined. I considered taking my evidence to internal HR, but that was a suicide mission. Gary played golf every Sunday with Richard, our director of human resources. They shared cigars, they shared expensive scotch, and they shared a deep, frat boy camaraderie. If I went to Richard, the evidence would mysteriously vanish, would be fired for insubordination, and Gary would continue his reign of terror. Internal justice was dead. I needed to go federal. I dove deeper into the corporate tax filings attached to the shadow team. That was when I struck the ultimate goldmine. Gary wasn't just stealing corporate funds. In order to make the ghosts look legitimate to the internal accounting software, he had been actively claiming state small business credits and the work opportunity tax credit for these non-existent employees. He was officially defrauding the United States government. I spent the weekend compiling the ultimate digital dossier. It was 50 pages of pure, unadulterated devastation. I included the server access logs, the IP addresses linking the offshore accounts back to his home network, the spoofed metadata containing my forged employee ID, the Getty image URLs, and the irrefutable proof of federal tax fraud. I bypassed local law enforcement entirely. I encrypted the entire package and submitted it directly to the white-collar crime division of the FBI and the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service. Then, I waited. The climax arrived on a mundane Tuesday at exactly 1 p.m. The office break room smelled faintly of burnt popcorn and stale coffee. Gary was holding a ceramic mug of artisanal pour-over, leaning casually against the granite counter, holding court with a group of wide-eyed, unpaid interns. I sat quietly at a corner table, pretending to review a spreadsheet on my iPad, my heart thudding violently against my ribs. The problem with this generation, Gary projected loudly, ensuring his voice carried across the room, is that everyone just wants a handout. Lazy employees constantly whining about the cost of living, begging for raises they haven't earned. You have to grind for your success. You have to bleed for the company. That's how you build true wealth. The heavy glass doors of the main lobby, situated just 20 feet down the hallway from the break room, suddenly shattered the quiet of the office. They didn't just open, they were aggressively pushed wide. Four individuals strode into the corridor. They weren't wearing corporate suits. They wore dark tactical windbreakers, utility belts, and expressions carved from solid granite. The bright yellow letters, FBI, were emblazoned across the backs of their jackets. The entire break room went dead silent. The only sound was the low hum of the refrigerator. The lead agent, a tall woman with piercing eyes, walked straight past the reception desk, her gaze sweeping the open floor plan before locking onto the break room. She marched directly toward us, her badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "Gary Vance," she barked, her voice echoing off the acoustic ceiling tiles. Gary froze. The smug, condescending smirk completely evaporated from his face, replaced by a mask of sheer, unadulterated terror. The blood drained from his heavily tanned cheeks. "Excuse me, do you have an appointment?" Gary stammers, his mug shaking so violently that hot coffee splashed over the rim, burning his fingers. "You can't just barge into a private corporate facility. Gary Vance, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and corporate embezzlement," the agent stated, her tone entirely devoid of emotion. "This is a mistake. I haven't done anything. I'm the victim of a cyber attack." Gary shrieked, his voice cracking by a full octave as two agents flanked him. "Put the mug down, sir, and place your hands behind your back," the second agent commanded. "No, wait. Call Richard in HR. Call my lawyer. Ruby, tell them," he screamed, his eyes locking onto mine, a pathetic, desperate plea for salvation from the very woman he had tried to send to prison. "Tell them what, Gary?" I whispered, standing up slowly, maintaining absolute, icy eye contact with him. "That the budget is bone dry?" "Oh my God," a young female intern screamed, backing away in horror as the heavy metal handcuffs ratcheted tightly around Gary's wrists with a series of sharp, mechanical clicks. They perp-walked him out of the break room, down the main hallway, and out through the glass doors. I followed the procession at a safe distance, standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows of the lobby. Down in the executive parking lot, a heavy-duty federal tow truck was already reversing into Gary's reserved parking space. I watched, a profound sense of satisfaction washing over me, as the heavy steel hooks locked onto the undercarriage of his pristine, charcoal-gray Porsche 911 Turbo. They hoisted his pride and joy into the air, impounding it as an asset purchased with stolen funds. The fallout was catastrophic and incredibly swift. Within an hour, the chief financial officer, a stern man named Marcus who rarely left the executive suite, called me into the glass-walled boardroom. He looked pale, staring at a printed copy of the FBI warrant. "Ruby," Marcus began, his voice trembling slightly. "The feds just served us with a massive subpoena. They told me you were the whistleblower. They said Gary has been stealing from us." I don't understand." Gary said the payroll budget was empty. He said we were barely staying afloat. I calmly slid my laptop across the polished table, opening the mirror ledger dashboard. I showed him the exact mechanisms of the shadow team. I showed him the forged metadata. And finally, I showed him the internal escrow account where I had successfully trapped the latest $33,000 ghost payment. "The budget wasn't dry, Marcus," I stated firmly, looking him dead in the eye. "Gary was bleeding you dry. He was stealing over $400,000 a year, and he forged my digital signature to take the fall if he ever got caught. I protected myself, and I protected this company." Marcus stared at the screen, the magnitude of the betrayal sinking in. He ran a hand over his face, looking up at me with a mixture of profound shock and deep respect. Gary's trial was short and brutal. Because I had handed the IRS ironclad proof of tax fraud on a silver platter, the federal prosecutors showed absolutely no mercy. He is currently facing 15 years in a federal penitentiary. His offshore accounts were frozen, his assets were liquidated to pay restitution, and his reputation was permanently incinerated. Richard, the HR director, was quietly forced to resign a week later after an internal audit revealed he had ignored multiple red flags to protect his golfing buddy. As for me, I didn't just keep my job. The company was terrified of the sheer scope of my forensic capabilities and desperately grateful that I had saved them from an even larger IRS audit. Marcus completely restructured the department. I was immediately given Gary's old corner office, the one with the heavy mahogany desk. I was officially promoted to head of corporate compliance. And the salary increase? I negotiated a massive 40% bump. The sweetest irony of all is that my entire massive raise was entirely funded by the freshly liberated, ghost budget that Gary had so carefully maintained for his noir detectives. I sat back in my new leather executive chair, looking out the massive window at the parking lot where Gary's Porsche used to sit. I took a slow sip of my coffee, relishing the quiet hum of a perfectly balanced, entirely legitimate payroll server running in the background. Am I the monster here, or did he get exactly what he deserved?
If you have made it this far and want to see more videos like this, then kindly subscribe and turn on notifications so you may never miss another story like this.